Hi, welcome to Forever Wild, a podcast about family memory and the stories that shape who we become. I'm Meagan McGovern. I'm the oldest of four sisters.
And I'm Nora Gibbs, the one that's most similar to Martha Stewart of the Four Sisters, and the youngest. Together, we're sharing our journey growing up with an actor father, a mother who didn't think the rules applied to her, at least financially, and a childhood full of chaos, adventure, and unforgettable moments.
Every episode, we tell stories about our childhood, and we talk about siblings who come from the same families, can see their past in very different ways, and how we carry that forward in our lives today.
Thank you for joining us. This is Forever Wild.
Okay, so one of the things that in this little catch-up thing, I've got a question for Nora,
Hit me.
which should be kind of fun. We have a friend, well, he was my friend from high school, Chris. He was friends with us from 14 to, say, 17, 18, and we've kept in touch. He actually ended up getting a PhD and doing all sorts of cool stuff. He lives in California, and he's read a couple drafts of my book, and I used to visit him a few times in the 80s and 90s, and so he's heard all the stories. So he's been listening to the podcast, and he wanted to know, he messaged me last night, he listened to the last
This is hard on me, so I'm really curious where this is going. In a loving way, he's hard on me. I love it.
He's hard on both of us. He's actually, okay, he's probably listening. I don't care. He's kind of a dick. And I think that's his persona is, I'm kind of a dick. And that's fine. He's what
funny.
It is.
He makes me laugh, so it's okay.
It is. But he says that we pulled a lot of punches on the Ben Stein thing.
What does that mean?
And that we didn't. It means that we didn't go as far as we should have. We didn't say everything bad about Ben Stein. We didn't say, look, the guy's a pedophile and a creep and, you know, he should be in jail. And so we were like, well, these are the things he did. And he wasn't, you know, nothing was illegal and it wasn't that bad. And that we should have just hit
Well, it's funny because I actually went on Reddit and typed in Ben Stein pedophile. And
as you do.
And then I typed in and something came up about there was a sexting scandal with a young girl with him. And then there were a couple of things. I mean, I wanted to be honest about my experience with the Ben Stein situation. And you can't call someone a pedophile if they've never touched someone. And I've literally talked to police officers about this. Was there anything?
Okay, they call Hillary Clinton a pedophile, and she's never touched someone. You can call someone, and
she's not. You know, he's not ordering kids like pizza, right? I mean, it's not.
Okay. Yes, or drinking blood.
Correct. I mean, I kind of feel like I went as far with it as I could, knowing what I know about him. I mean, he never physically touched anybody. I've literally spoken to police officers about this. Is there anything you can do to have this guy arrested for being a creep? And they're like, no, he's a creep. He never touched anyone. He never did anything, you know, that was illegal. So you can't really say, yeah, I mean, I think I made it pretty clear the guy's a creep and he's a piece of shit person, but I don't know for sure that he ever touched any children. So I can't go out there and call this guy a pedophile when, for me, I associate pedophilia with physically molesting children.
The other thing too, and I will not, I'm going to be very light and very circumspect about this. I told Chris this last night, is that our sister Morgan, who was the one who was, had pictures taken of her and who met Ben Stein. And it sounds like he came to the house more often. Chris said he remembers Ben Stein coming to the house a couple times. And then our friend Susie said she babysat for him a couple of times. So we must have kept in touch with him. It must have been more than once or twice. But our sister Morgan, who I will not talk a lot about on this podcast for a lot of different reasons, but she's very fragile and in a lot of different ways right now. And she remembers a lot of things differently than we do. And she has a very different perspective on our childhood than we do. And I don't want to say or do anything that is going to do any harm to her.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go out there and say, oh, he molested Morgan or he touched her. He didn't. He took pictures of her in a bathing suit. Super fucking creepy. But...
well, and said he wanted to buy her clothes and take her alone for a weekend in the city. Right. I mean, if someone wants to take me for a weekend in New York City and buy me clothes, I know what that means, you know, and I'm not 13.
Right. I will say I'm very proud that mom said, bro, absolutely not. Get the fuck out of here. You know,
Okay, that bar is so
no,
low that you're playing limbo in hell.
I know.
Okay, I mean, come on,
I gotta give her.
that's a low bar for a parent to be like,
She
no, I
didn't.
won't sell my child into prostitution, and you're proud of her for that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it. You know what? I don't know, man. Weirder things have been done in this life. So anyway,
Okay, so let's get going with our
sure.
story. As of last week, we were in LA, then we moved to Connecticut, then we had stayed with my aunt and uncle, and we got set up in a house. We were in
We were
Fairfield,
in
we were in
Westport.
Westport, moved to Fairfield, all of that.
We were in we were in
So,
Westport, and then for whatever reason, we had to move out of that house. I feel like the rent wasn't paid, and we ended up moving to Fairfield, Connecticut, which is another incredibly wealthy town, just a few miles from Westport. And Fairfield,
okay,
you know,
so this is the favorite house I've ever lived
great
in
house.
of all
Oh my god,
houses
it's the
ever.
best house ever.
And this house is my fantasy house. And if
You know, it's
I
online because this
were
was like
going
a few
to
years
rent,
ago. It's
it's
online.
what?
You can look it up. It's like
Oh, and it was for sale, and I looked it up, and it was actually not like that much money. It was like about $1 million, which in some places that's a lot of money, in other places that's a two-bedroom
right,
apartment. So
beautiful house.
um, this house was an 18th century colonial, and it was the kind of house that originally had an outdoor kitchen, and the kitchen had just been closed in, and there were slate patios, and there was a well from the
But
1700s,
it had
and
the well
this was
next to the well, there was a bench that went around it, so you could sit in the garden, and there were sunflowers that grew in that garden.
and there were ancient roses that had probably been planted 150 years ago that were brambles
Best
everywhere, and there was an attic in the house that was just this ancient attic with like this tiny creepy staircase, and there was like on the main floor there had been no bathrooms built in the house, so the only toilet was under the stairs in a little teeny closet under the
yeah.
stairs. And glorious, glorious house with a sunroom. And we had, of course, no business being
Had
there.
it back to nature
But
preserve.
yes, it backed up to a nature preserve, and it had woods around it. And if you could come up with a fantasy house
Oh,
for
and the
me,
best
this
part,
was
it had a
yes.
garage apartment, like it had an apartment like behind the house, like a separate house.
Well, it was a carriage house. It had originally been for carriages, and it had been turned into a tiny apartment, and it was old, and it smelled old, and it was kind of weird. But the house, I'm trying to remember how many bedrooms it had. I think it had 3 bedrooms
Well, Morgan
upstairs.
and I shared
So when we
one. Susie had her
right,
own. Mom had hers.
right. So that's the question. I still don't understand how this
3 bedroom.
happened. You and Morgan got a bedroom.
Susie got her own.
Mom got a bedroom. Why did Susie get a bedroom and I didn't? And why
You
did
got a bedroom.
Katie
It
not
was in
get a
the
bedroom?
basement.
Okay, where did Katie
There was
sleep?
a little
Katie had the dining
Katie had a
room.
room off the dining room. Katie and Tyra shared a little room. When Tyra came out to visit us months later, there was a room off the dining room. It was like a sitting room.
Okay, but it was a dining room. It was the
Dining room.
dining room. So they closed in the dining room and put Katie and Tyra in there, and then I got the basement. The basement
Smelled really bad.
was a basement. It was damp and wet, and it was not a room, and it didn't have paneling on the walls or anything. I think it had a dirt floor.
Yeah, it was great.
It might have had a concrete floor, but there was a sump pump in there, and it was wet, and there were rats in the walls. There were like literal rats that were in the walls, and I don't know how I agreed to that or how I got talked into that. I do remember that I needed my own bedroom, but I was 18. I had just turned 18
I just
after
can't believe the
moving
mom
there.
put Susie in a bedroom and you got that. Like,
I I wonder if I wanted it. I wonder if I thought it was cool. Like there was a fireplace down there. Like I think it was like the original place that they lived while they were building the house. But we're talking about a 250
yeah,
year old stone damp
not a place for a
basement.
16 or
And
17-year-old girl. How old are we? You were 17 or
no,
18?
I had just turned 18, but like it was old wooden stairs to get down there, and creepy and damp and moist. And I would wake up in the morning, my bed would be wet and damp from the just from everything. And before long, Katie and I moved out to the carriage house.
Right.
And I don't think it was ready when we first moved in. I don't think it was fixed up. And we sort of fixed it up or maybe painted it. And it was probably one big room that was 20 by 10, a tiny, tiny bedroom, toilet, shower.
There was a
And
kitchen. Little tiny kitchen.
I think it was like a stove and a mini fridge kind of thing. So it was about the size of a nice dorm room or a dorm apartment. It was kind of it was a cool place for two teenagers. It really was, but it wasn't like a huge apartment or anything. But because of this great property, it was far from the main house. Like you would go to the main house, and then this was way behind where you would park the carriages originally, maybe 100 feet behind the main house. But it was enough that Katie and I could have parties out there, and Mom wouldn't care. And I was 18.
And Mom was also in a major depression in this house. Mom was in bed a lot.
That's what I am remembering about this house, is that I don't know what happened or what shut her down. I don't know. I know that when we were living in Los Angeles, one of the things I forgot to say in the last episode, we were living in LA after Oregon. And I think maybe that's what shut her down, is not getting the money from the house in LA. And she realized that everything that had happened on Silver Century, all the money she won, all of the prize money that had gone into the house in LA, she thought she was going to translate that into something else. We moved to Oregon. The money never came. We moved back to LA to get the money. The money never came. Now we're back in Connecticut. I think she turned 50 in this house, because I remember a big 50.
That's about right, because I would have been 14 when we moved next.
Yeah. And so I think she realized that everything was just kind of over. We're living in this house that she can't afford. There's no money coming in. She's never going to get a job. Nothing's really going to happen the way she wants. I'm over 18 now. Her kids are teenagers. You're, 13, 14. Her life's not turning out the way she wanted. And she just kind of crashed. And she was in bed all the time. I remember some painting and things going on. But I don't know what she did every day. I do know that this was our first exposure to kids with money.
Right.
And Katie went to what high school? Westport High School, Fairfield High School.
Well, I went to Tomlinson Middle School. I think she must have gone to Fairfield High School.
And Tyra was there on and off. And there were kids with so much money that it was just unreal. Like they all got BMWs for their 16th birthday, and really nice cars. And they all had bands because they would just go buy the equipment they needed. They would buy a drum set.
The kind of money on this, like I, was playing softball, and one of our softball coaches was Meatloaf. And so Meatloaf, he had a daughter named Pearl, and she was like on the softball team. And then there was another girl on our team, and her name was Chandler Roosevelt. She was Roosevelt's great-great-granddaughter. So, I mean, there was some real, generational wealth in some of the kids that I knew. And these weren't the kids that you guys were, partying with. These were just kids that I went to school with,
Well, the kids we were partying with, their fathers all worked on Wall Street. They all worked in New York City, all of them. And I don't know where they came from. I don't know where we met them. But this was the kind of town where there was a beach, and it was open all summer long, and you would get the pass for the beach, and people would go every day. But you would just go down into the town and go to the festival and walk around and meet people. One of my best friends, Eben, I met him wandering around at the beach festival, and we've been friends ever since. And he was the ultimate Connecticut preppy.
Oh yeah, Eben is the epitome of Connecticut preppy.
They got a house. He has a summer house.
I loved his mom, and his mom dated Jimi Hendrix, and Jimi Hendrix asked his mom to marry him. Did you know that?
Oh, wow. I did not. I know that.
And his father was a famous jazz musician.
His father was a jazz musician. They had a summer house in Maine because everybody. And this is not to diss Evan because he's really one of my favorite
He's the best.
People. He couldn't get up for school, and it was really hard for him to get up. And yeah, now I realize that is, ADHD or something. It was something that was different about him than anybody else. But he couldn't get up for school and had a very hard time, even though he was brilliant. And so he went to a prep school in Maine that she sent him away to, a boarding school where there were 12 kids. It was called the Deck House. And they got you up for school to make sure that he could get into a good
Yeah.
college, because that's what you did there.
Yep.
If your kid didn't, so all of it. So we met these kids who just had all the money and these ancient houses and these fantastic connections. And they would show up for a party with, a bottle of tequila, a bottle of booze, 3 6-packs of beer. They'd been drinking since they were 14, 15. We were not a drinking and partying family.
Never.
Until, the whole time we were in Oregon, I never had a beer. I never drank in California with my friends from high school. I was not a drinker. At this house, there was cocaine, there was booze, there was alcohol.
You guys did cocaine?
I don't know what you're talking about. I just said there might have been some in the house.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Just kidding, you guys. You were supposed to be my big sis. Oh my God, I'm so disappointed.
I honestly don't remember actually doing it. I just remember there being it there. I don't know. I remember talking about it.
There was no cocaine.
I don't know. I remember one night the parties were so bad that one of Katie's boyfriends went to hit me because I can provoke you.
You can. You poke.
And imagine a wealthy Connecticut frat bro at a party and tells me something about feminism. That's just the way it's going to go. Right. So he went to take a swing at me and he missed because he was so drunk, and he put his hand through the glass on the window.
I remember that.
He put his hand through the window, and he pulled back his arm, and there's a piece of glass sticking out of his vein on his arm, and it's throbbing, and it's an arterial wound, and it's pumping out of his wrist. And he wants to go home and go to bed. Yeah. And doesn't want me to call the cops. And Katie's yelling at me because I provoked him. And he's telling me that I'm, all sorts of expletives.
I remember he called you a Phoenix Tuesday. I don't say that word.
Yes, he did. And I was really happy about that. And then I was tempted to let him bleed to death. But this was the only time, I think, that we had to go wake Mom up. And Mom was taking sleeping pills. And we had to go wake her up and get her out of bed and get her to call. I think she called his parents. I don't remember an ambulance, but I don't know. He probably just died, and there was blood everywhere. And I think after that, maybe that's when I had to move into the basement. That's what it was. Katie and I got that house from the very beginning. And then once that happened and all the parties happened, I had to move into the basement.
Good. Well, I'm glad to see she actually parented, like a little.
Yes. No, she rented out the house for $1,000.
I remember she rented out that house, though.
She rented it out so that she could make money and threw us out of there. Yeah. And I was so pissed about that. And then I had to go to the basement with the rats. That's what it was. Yeah. So that's why I ended up in the rat-filled basement and how Katie ended up in the dining room.
That makes more sense.
So anyway, we didn't last there long. Go figure. I did go back to college. I went to Sacred Heart University, which is a little private school that was a commuter school. I think I got 3 semesters.
Well, I know we were in that house for like at least a full year, because I remember this is the house that I started going to summer camp. I went to Camp Candlewood in Candlewood Lake, and I started going to Girl Scout camp, and I went for 2 years in a row. So we did.
I think we moved in January, and we didn't move out until a year from May.
Can I tell you my childhood trauma story?
Oh, I know what this is, and it makes me look bad, but go ahead. Tell me anyway, because I know
which one is
this.
This is the one where I was supposed to be picked up for camp, and nobody picked me up for camp. And we were all being picked up in a church parking lot, and everybody's like, "Hey, where's your mom?" And this is before cell phones. And I'm like, "I don't know. Someone's going to be here soon, I guess." And my friend Terry's mom, or Gail's mom, my friend Gail Rosenblum, whose grandfather was Samuel Morse, who invented the Morse code, by the way. How cool is that? But anyway, so Gail, her mom stayed with me, and she was like, "Why don't we just call your house and see if they're there?" And Mom answered the phone and she said, hello. And I said, you're supposed to pick me up. And this is like an hour away from where, we lived, where she was supposed to pick me up.
Right.
And she was like, oh, I thought that was tomorrow. You guys forgot me at camp.
Wow.
I had been gone like 2 weeks. I was expecting like a parade when I got home. You guys fucking forgot about me at camp. So anyway, Gail's mom dropped me off at home. And
Well, I remember being jealous that you learned how to windsurf or
yeah, I
sailboard
can
or
do it all,
something.
man. I can say.
And I remember being jealous that you got to go to camp. So you were jealous I got a graduation prom.
Well,
I was jealous you got to go
I
to camp.
felt
I never went to
my
camp.
friends were going. I joined a Girl Scout troop in that school, and all of my friends were going to this camp. And I told them I couldn't afford it. And my Girl Scout troop leader gave me an application for financial aid for camp. And I literally sat down and filled out all the forms and got it all together and took it to the post office. I think I made somebody drive me to the post office and mailed off these financial aid forms so that I could go to camp, because there was no money to send me to camp. And I got a full ride to camp, and I got to go for the 2 weeks back to back. So it was a 14-day session.
Well, I'll tell you one of the coolest things I did there. So we lived there for that year and a half. And in the first summer there, one of the summers there, I wanted to be an underwater archaeologist. And surprise, surprise, Sacred Heart University doesn't have an underwater archaeology degree. So I went off one summer and I went through, I think it was through Cornell University. I took a class in underwater archaeology at an island off the coast of Maine called Appledore Islands. And I think it was for 2 weeks. And I had to get certified in scuba diving to go do it. And I went and paid the classes. I had a job at a restaurant and I paid for the scuba classes, got certified in scuba diving, took the class and went up there. And you guys had to drive me to
Booth Bay Harbor.
Yeah, it was somewhere up in Maine. You had to drive me like Booth Bay Harbor or somewhere.
I still talk about Booth Bay Harbor. I love Booth Bay Harbor.
I love Booth Bay Harbor.
Pretty.
And so I took and I had to get on a ferry and go. But when we got there, I had paid classes were not that much then. It was like $300, $400, something about that. But I had paid most of the class, but there was still $300 due because we were supposed to pay it 6 weeks in advance. And of course we hadn't. And Mom wrote a check
Oh my God.
for the rest of it. And I remember Mom writing a check for the rest
You're
of
thinking,
it.
there's no way. That's the rubber.
I couldn't even think about it. I just went and got on the boat and did it because I knew they wouldn't find out in the next 2 weeks when I got on the boat. And Mom swore it would be there. What was I going to say? No, it's
That
not.
check was made of rubber. It was about to bounce all over the place.
Well, I went and I ate blueberry pie from blueberries we picked on the island. And every night we would scuba dive and we would go pick lobsters off the ocean floor and then boil them up in a pot on the
I
beach.
would like to go to this camp now. Can we go this summer?
And then we would go and look at archaeological ruins of some pottery place that had been there by the colonists in the late 1600s, and they had left pottery behind. And I met the most adorable, fantastic kids from Ivy League universities and everything else. And it was just, and the world's leading expert on sharks came and gave a tour about when sharks, and I would scuba dive and there were little baby nurse sharks down there. And this was the fantasy of what I wanted from college. And I knew I was going back to a couple of classes at Sacred Heart that I was not going to graduate from. But yeah, so later on, I never got the credit from that class because we owed them $300 and I never got, any of that paid off. So I remember them calling the house for years.
That's really funny. Well, hopefully the statute of limitations has also gone on that. So you don't get hit up for $300. And I don't get hit up for my Columbia House records that I still own.
That was probably the only way we listened to music
Yeah.
was that because we changed addresses all the time. So
Oh
why
my
not?
God. Crazy town.
So, all right, we ended up moving after 2 years here, and it was actually good that we moved because Katie and I were underwater. We were drinking too, even after we moved out of that house, we still went to other parties and things were just. I mean, I didn't like to drink and party, but I had some friends and I liked it, but it was a bad environment for kids without money.
Oh yeah.
We didn't have the money to back up partying all summer and then going to work and then going to college because we didn't have the money.
Well, we were so poor in this house. We had, I will tell you that we had I had a sleepover and all of the popular girls came. And it was like the end all be all sleepover. It was so fun. It was the best night ever. We had such a good time. And the next morning, we were all like, oh, what do you want to do today? And they invited me to go to the mall with them. And I was so excited that I finally got invited to go to the mall. Cause like back in those days, going to the mall that's where you did, you hung out on the mall.
Right.
And they were like, okay, just have your mom drop us off at the mall. Mom wouldn't let the girls in our car because we didn't have car insurance. And she was afraid that we were going to, somebody was going to crash the car or something. And if these girls got no car without car insurance and something happened, their families would own us. So she said no, and she wouldn't let us go to the mall. And I was so embarrassed. And she made everybody's parents come and take them home.
I wonder if that's true. That doesn't sound like mom. It sounds like, the car wasn't working right, or the car was going to be repossessed or something.
There
I'm
was,
surprised
and it
that
was really weird to me because I mean, we'd never had car insurance, right?
I was just going to say that doesn't sound like a reasonable explanation, because that doesn't sound like something would have
But I
stopped
mean,
her.
like I remember going into her room and saying, Mom, I really want to go to the mall. Can you take me and my friends? And she thought about it for a minute and she like literally told me that there was no car insurance and we couldn't take them in the car. So, and
Yeah.
I just told them some other story. Like my mom said, no, I mean, I'm not going to go tell these uber wealthy girls like, hey, I'm sorry, I can't be one of your friends because I'm poor. Anyway,
Yeah.
so who knows what the real story
Yeah.
was.
So in the background of all this, mom was working on stuff, and she was a freelance writer, if you asked her, which kind of bothers me because I say I'm a freelance writer. And so it bothers me because
Yeah,
that's what she said she
I
did.
know.
I know. Um, and, but she did have some articles here and there in the Inquirer and in other different places. And she made money selling tips to places. And I don't know what she did, but somehow out of all of this, she had another grand plan. And this was like the grand plan on Sale of the Century. The grand plan was, her family was from the Adirondacks. We had always been from the Adirondacks. And we've told this story that we were up there for a while and she had burned down the house. But she had a lot of connections up there, weird, tenuous connections, because she had never actually lived there. This is where her second cousins and her grandma's sister's kids were from, and where all of our ancestors were from. But she had only spent summers up there. She'd never actually lived there. But somehow, a friend of hers had the rights to a Boy Scout camp up there. And there was a Boy Scout camp that was this huge property. I think it was 145 acres. Maybe it was 245 acres. It was a lot. It was big. And it was all woods except for one small house in the property that had been there for 150 years. It was like a summer camp. You couldn't really live in the house year round, but it was a great Adirondack house. And the property was so far to the back that it had a mile-long driveway up through the woods. But the rest of the property was owned by the Boy Scouts and had been, and they had been going to develop it into a camp because it had lakes and it had rivers and it was, pretty pristine. But the Boy Scouts decided it wasn't in the right place for a camp and they weren't going to use it. And somehow or another, my mom talked one of her friends into the rights to sell the camp. I will never understand how she did that. I will never understand how she had the rights to it. I don't know whether she offered him $10 to sell the rights or whether she offered to be the contractor for it. Somewhere or another, my mother swindled, stole, or legitimately got the rights to the camp. But she didn't, the rights to sell it. But she didn't own it. She hadn't paid any money for it. But she was the only person who could sell the camp.
And she didn't have
So
a realtor degree. She was not a realtor.
she did at some point get a real estate
That was
license. One
later
of
when
the,
we were in Glens Falls.
yeah, yeah. But she did. I mean, she knew a lot about real estate. She'd bought and sold so many houses and lived in
But
so many
on
houses. And,
paper,
but
legally, she was not a realtor. Just for those wondering
no,
how maybe she was a realtor. She was not a
no.
realtor.
But a realtor doesn't have a right to sell a certain property either. This was something where if you wanted to buy this property, you had to go through her. And she wouldn't end up with the money for the property. Somebody else had to buy it, but she would end up with the profit on it. So if she could sell it for 100, so if someone would buy it for 150 or whatever the guy wanted for it, or the rights to it were 150, and she could sell it for 300, she would get 150,000 out of it. I will never, no matter what paperwork I look at and how I figure out how this worked, I don't understand how it worked, but it did on paper. So she had people in the Adirondacks that were, of course, interested in this property because It was 150,000 acre or 150 acres of pristine woodlands for a very low price. She just had to come up. She just had to pay off the loan for the Boy Scouts or whatever it was. It was whatever they owed was all that she needed to cover. So it was for some ungodly price, like $40,000 or $50,000 was all she needed to cover, and she would keep the profit on the rest. So she wanted to move to the Adirondacks so she could make this deal go through so that she could keep part of the property for herself and let somebody else buy the rest of the property. That was going to be like her finder's fee, was she was going to keep 40 acres and they were going to buy the other 110 acres or however it was going to work. So we needed to leave Connecticut and go up there. But she didn't want to lose the house we had in Connecticut. She just wanted to do this for the summer. So she rented out our house for $3,000 a month to somebody else, to people from New York City who wanted to come to Connecticut.
I didn't know that.
For the So we left all of our stuff. We took most of the stuff out, left some of the furniture, and put it in storage in one of the garages there. And then moved to the Adirondacks because she got them to pay for the house up front, $9,000 for 3 months. For 3 months in that house that she was paying $1,700 a month for, which she probably didn't pay for the summer. She took $9,000 and we went up to the Adirondacks with that, and we rented a house in the Adirondacks.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how that happened. Interesting.
Well, and the other part was funny was that she didn't have a place to stay, so she sent Eben and me up to go look for a place in the Adirondacks. And he was home for the summer, and he and I were not dating. I was crazy in love with him, but we didn't ever date. He was just my best friend because apparently I'm not the right kind of girl for a preppy Connecticut boy. Go figure. But he adored me. He thought I was the best, coolest person ever. Just not kind of date. So she sent us up to the Adirondacks on a fact-finding.
And this is like a 5-hour drive, 4.5, 5 hours.
I was just going to say it's what, 4 or 5 hours, and I don't remember. I remember driving up there a couple of times.
We drove it a couple of years ago. We were in the Adirondacks for something. We drove to Connecticut. I think it's like 4.5, 5 hours.
Yeah, and it's not a bad drive, but it's shitty. And okay, it's not a bad drive till you get past.
In the summer, it's beautiful. In the winter,
it's one of the most America's most scenic highway. It's kind of like Colorado. It's fantastic if you're going in the summer. In the winter, it's tricky, and it's back mountain roads, and there's a lot of snow, and you don't want to go during a blizzard. But we went in the summer, and we found a fantastic little house for rent. I think in those days we looked in the paper, or you went into the bar and said, who's got a house for rent? And we went up there and checked out the house, and we actually went to the house, rented it, took my mom's money and put down the down payment for the thing, and came back for the weekend. And he and I had a blast, and I thought, this is the life we could spend. And she promised that I'd be back in September in time for school, because I was at Sacred Heart University. I had 3 semesters there. So now, after 2 years out of high school, I had enough credits for like being a freshman, and I was okay with this. So we went back and we got, but you know what? We didn't bring our stuff. This was like one of the first moves. We didn't bring our stuff because we left it at the house in Connecticut. Yeah. That's why we were able to move into this little furnished place.
And this house was on Lake Abenaki and was on Stanton Road, because my teacher up there ended up being Miss Stanton. Her family was named after her. Sorry.
Everybody up there, like Bennett Road is named after the Bennetts who still up there, and everything up there is. Yeah. Well, so the place that my mother wanted to buy was on a stretch of road called Fagan's Flats. And the Fagans were my great-grandparents. They owned inn there, a bed and breakfast there. My great-great-grandfather was from Ireland.
She wanted to buy a house there while we were living in that little house?
No, the
Sisty place?
The property, the Sisty place, was on Fagan's Flats.
The property, those behind listening, was called the Sisty place. SISTE.
And it was called the Sisty place because her friend Bobby Sisty had lived there in the 50s and 60s in this house that she had the rights to that had been turned into the Boy Scout camp. So the story goes, though. All right, you want to tell the story about the Sisty place, why Sistys didn't live there anymore?
You tell it, and then I'll tell what I remember.
Okay. So the Sistys, or whoever it was who had lived in this house, lived in the house, but everybody had said there was a ghost on the property, and everybody told them that that was ridiculous and they didn't care. But something had happened to them that was so scary that they had moved out of the house in the 1950s and left everything the way it was, like furniture and everything there. And nobody had lived in the house up until now, until like 1990. This was 1988, 1989. So it'd been almost 40 years since somebody lived in the house because they moved out the day after this bad thing happened. And everybody knew that this place was haunted. And everybody knew that this place had a ghost called the Peddler's
The
Ghost.
Peddler. And
The
all
Peddler,
I know
yeah.
about this is that there was a ghost of a man who used to have a peddling cart. Like when people back in the olden days, again, back when Megan was a baby, they used to like go from town to town or whatever. They would have like a cart and they would just sell like pots and pans and random things and anything they could sell, right? And this ghost, the peddler, would go up and down the property peddling his wares, and you could hear the pots and pans banging around in the middle of the night, supposedly. Like,
Well, apparently the story is that this was logging camp at one point, and that where the house was, there was a mile-long driveway down to the house. That had originally been a logging road that went into the main part. That's why the area for the house was cleared because it had been logged. And that the peddler came in to sell the loggers, I don't know, food, wares, pots and pans, pancake mix, who knows what he was selling. And they'd gotten into some kind of argument and the peddler had been killed. And that the ghost had been on the property ever since. And I don't know if I believe in ghosts or anything else, but I do know that this was a creepy.
it was
house.
really fucking creepy.
Do you remember?
I remember bits and pieces of it. I remember thinking, I don't want to live here. Like, and I was up for anything at that point. You know, like I loved old, funky, random houses. This house was small, and it was more a camp than a house.
Well, and it was very 1950s. Like the bathroom had bright pink and black tile
Right
all
now
over
would
it.
be
Like
so cool.
it would be, but in the 80s, it looked like a 30-year-old house. Now it looks like a retro, house. But the other thing was that because there was a mile-long driveway, there was no
Yeah.
telephone because you couldn't get a phone line down that long, and there was no electricity. It was run by generators.
And you had to pay
And
someone to plow the road in the snow, and we couldn't afford to pay anybody.
well, not only that, you had to pay to repair the road. It's a mile-long gravel
Right.
driveway. So in the winter, every time it snows, not only do you have to pay to have somebody to plow it, which they do get up to 6 feet of snow there. We're talking not at a time, you get 1 foot at a
Right.
time or 6 inches at a time, but it adds up. And in order to go, like to get on the school bus by 7 a.m., you would have to have somebody plow. That's never going to happen.
Okay. So how
And
did we end up not moving into that house? We
we
didn't own the house. She
moved
wanted
into
to sell it. So we moved into the house on Lake Abenaki.
right. So she found a guy in Indian Lake, and I don't want to talk about his name or anything else. He was a businessman. He
I will
was
tell you,
perfectly
he's still
decent
there, and he's a
person.
very big businessman there. He has done nothing but great things for that town.
He died a couple years ago, but his son
Okay.
is still
Well,
running with the
the
same name.
family name is still there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Super
And
nice
so he was a perfectly nice guy, a decent man who heard my mother's proposal that she had this piece of land that, she only needed to get like 40,000 for, whatever the number was, something really cheap. Because she had the rights that she could buy this piece of land for like $40,000. She had first
right of refusal. Yeah.
dibs on it. Right of first refusal, whatever it was. And so maybe it was owned by a corporation or something that was the only way they could sell it. So if he would buy the property for say 160,000, my mother would give up the rights to all of it. That would pay off the 40,000 that they needed to cover. And she wanted to keep the house and 40 acres. And I think he thought this was too good to be true and it must be a scam because nobody has offers like this. But he had a couple lawyers look into it and they realized it was a good deal and they realized it was legit and that she really did have the right to this. And he said, actually, that doesn't sound bad. If you want to buy this and you want to own land, I think she was going to come out of it. At the end of it, she was going to come out of it with the house, 40 acres, and something like $40,000. he was going to get 120 acres of land that he could turn into whatever he wanted for whatever. And it was a pretty decent price, and it wouldn't cost him anything except the cost of the land. But it was going to take months to do all the deals and months to do all the paperwork, which is why she was there for the summer. So within a couple of weeks, he gave her like $15,000 cash as an advance on the whole thing. And he let us use his van. It was a van that was owned by the company because he owned like a water sports thing. And I think he did skiing in the summer and in the winter. I mean, skiing in the winter and in the summer.
He did whitewater rafting because we went rafting. He let us all do whitewater rafting for free. And I fell out of the boat.
Right.
Yeah. Good times.
Right. So he was Mom's business partner, essentially. But it was going to take months to get all the deals worked out. And I also obviously think that he could see that Mom had no money, couldn't wait long for this deal. And if he had to lend us a van, it wasn't like she had a lot of money to put into it. I don't think he wanted to screw her over. But he also was a businessman and wasn't going to be taken for a ride. And he didn't want his reputation and name put us with anything bad. So over the course of the summer, we would go and visit this place and talk about how to live there. And he would say things like, "You're sure you want to live here in the winter when there's no way to get to school?" And she's like, "Oh, we can figure it out. We can hire a local guy. We'll get a truck." And he's like, "Well, what are you going to do about a phone?" She's like, "Well, we don't really need a phone. We can just, go down to the..." I don't even know how she was doing all of this, but he's like, "Well, you're going to need to get a better generator. Nobody's lived there in 40 years. It's had a caretaker, but it's not." Anyway, by September, we were supposed to move in and you were going to go to school. So I don't remember what we did that July and August. We partied a lot.
Oh my God, we had such a good time. I loved Indian Lake. I had the best time ever. My friend Shelly worked at the ice cream store in town. We went to the movies all the time. Right. We helped her. Mom met a girl on the street. And I'll never forget this. Mom met a girl on the street who was 13 years old. And she said, "Hi, my name's Maureen. I have a daughter. How old are you?" And the girl looked at her and was like, "I'm sorry, what?" And she said, "How old are you?" And she said, "I'm 13. She said, "I have a 13-year-old daughter. Will you come be her friend?" And I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? This is the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened." And she is still one of my dearest friends in my whole life. It was Taryn. Mom flagged Taryn down on the street and said, "Will you be my daughter's friend?" And who knew? Mom could pick your friends for you. Literally picked her up off the street in Indian Lake.
Spoiler alert, I dated her brother. That's all you need to say. Do not say anything else.
Oh my God, my tongue is bleeding because I'm biting it so hard.
Do not say anything else. Anyway.
But if you'd like to email me, I'll give you details. Just kidding.
He was a senior in high school.
Exactly.
And I was 2 years into college. So I was a little bit older than he was.
That's so true. Okay. Anyway,
we spent the whole summer. I had another boyfriend, or I didn't really have a boyfriend. Katie had a boyfriend, and
let me tell you, Indian Lake, the town we were living in, was a very small town, and 4 blonde girls came roaring into town. Meagan and Katie and Morgan at this point were all like to party. I'm like goody two shoes in the background, like, "Don't smoke around me. I don't want to smell like smoke." And everybody's smoking and drinking. And the house was on a lake. It was the coolest little house. It was so fun. But we were incredibly poor in this house.
But everybody in Indian Lake was poor. That was okay in Indian Lake.
It was very sad though. Like I'll never forget it. Like I had a friend at this point, Taryn's good friend, Carrie, that I had met. And Carrie's dad worked for the city or the county or whatever. And we hadn't paid our water bill. And we were getting close to being evicted from this house for not paying rent or something. And her dad had to come and turn off the water. So we didn't have any water. We didn't have running water for a lot of the time we lived there. And I remember him like with tears in his eyes that he's turning off the water with this woman and 4 little girls. And it was heartbreaking,
There were a lot of hard things about that house, but a lot of people in Indian Lake were poor. A lot of people didn't have good cars. And there was a very big divide between the locals and the townies and people who came up for the summer and had rental cabins and everything else. But the people who lived in Indian Lake, nobody in Indian Lake has money. You can buy a house there right now for $100,000 and you're cold in the winter and there's nothing to do in the winter. Literally, there are people that live there that you don't see except in the winter because the only way to get to them, they're on the other side of a lake that's, 10 miles, 20 miles long And in the winter, you just use your snowmobile and go across and see them all winter long, and you drink at the bars over there that, in the winter. And in the summer, you don't see them at all. And vice versa. There are other people you see just because you go fishing. They have people that go ice fishing and they use that for their food. There are people that hunt deer and moose and bear because that's what they eat. There are people who grow gardens all summer and then they can it and they live off $8,000 to $10,000 a year, and they live very well because they hunt and fish and can. It's a very old school way of life, almost Appalachian. And then obviously there are people there who are, online and doctors and retired and everything else. But
well, and it's funny because like this was the point where, Taryn had a single mom, and her mom, loved me, wasn't a super fan of you, but and I was always,
oh,
I was your sister, right? So, I mean,
she wasn't. I've been up there a couple times, and she's
well,
nice
she is now. It's 30 years later, 4 years later. But okay,
wow.
Regardless.
Tim married a very, very nice woman, and I'm still friends with him online.
Oh, I'm saying, nice I'm not even talking about that. I'm just saying her mom, worked very hard, and she worked at, she was waitress, and she worked really hard to support her. And this is the first time that I remember, and they lived in a trailer park, and the trailer park there that's where a lot of people lived. It wasn't like, in Texas.
A trailer park there is not like a trailer park in Texas. It's just a house.
It was the first time I remember really thinking like, why can't mom just get a job? We could live in a trailer and it'd be stable. Like when I was jealous of a trailer, living in a trailer and living in, a very small house, but it was stable. Like I would have rather lived there and never had to move than.
Because Tim and Taryn were stable. They had a home and they had bedrooms that were neat and
she's
organized.
A smart cookie. Tim's brilliant. I mean, Joe, their other little brother. I mean, they're all just like really smart, incredible people. And they lived in a trailer their whole life. And it was fine. There was nothing wrong with that.
Because that's what they could afford and because their mother could support them. I know. And it was. And and that was one of the reasons, this is going to sound stupid. One of the reasons I ended up dating him is because he's this stable, nice, bright guy who, from a tiny town, who's going to go off and do great things in the world. And I'm like, but yeah, we came roaring in and kind of destroyed a lot of stuff. And we left a lot of wreckage behind.
Right. Sorry. So let's get back to the man and the business deal. I apologize.
By the end of that summer, it's clear that this businessman is dragging this out as long as possible to give mom the least amount of money that is fair, but he is not going to speed things along just because she's broke. Right. And so a couple times I would go to the property with mom and we would walk along it and she would say, all right, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be your 8 acres. We're going to set, he's going to give me 40 acres. And so 40 times 5, is 8 each. So each child is going to get 8 acres. And I'm going to put it in a trust that is in your name so that your husband can never get it from you in a divorce and that your kids can't get it from you. It's going to be something that you own for the rest of your life that will be passed down to your kids because I don't want you to lose it.
That'd be nice.
And I picked out the lake where my house was going to be. And I picked out the cabin, the design of the cabin that I wanted. And I was going to have a granite fireplace because there was granite all over, not granite, garnet everywhere and garnet mines everywhere. And I was going to have huge garnet. There's rocks with garnet sticking out of them everywhere there. And you can get that. You can have it in the fireplace and it's gorgeous. And I had the layout and the design and I knew what kind of porch I wanted, but I wanted to make sure it was screened in so there were no mosquitoes. And I yearned for this more than I had ever wanted anything in my life. And could not wait for this to happen because I had given up. At this point, I'm supposed to go back to Sacred Heart University in a couple weeks. And I don't see it happening and I don't know what's going to happen, but I would have a home base. You would have a home base. We would have a place that all 4 of us could come back together. And no matter where mom went, no matter what happened with anything, nobody could take this away from us. It was going to be in a trust. Even if I didn't build the house till I was 30, I would have the land. But the first day of school came and went and we were still up there and we had lost the house in Connecticut because the guy found out that we were subletting. and we didn't have a right to do it. And we didn't have a way to go back and get our stuff. And we had to leave everything back there behind. And we hadn't paid for the house on the lake. And so mom did a deal with the guy and said, what if you give me $10,000 cash now and I'll take less land? And he said, okay, I'll give you $10,000 cash now, and gave her $10,000. And I think this happened 2 or 3 times until it got to the point that by Christmas, there was nothing left. And all she had was $15,000 and no land.
Yeah.
And he was still going to buy it, but that was it. And there was no house, no land, and anything else. And I think that's where we just ended up everything, and where everything just kind of fell apart. And we knew at that point, I knew at that point that I was leaving and I was never coming back. And that I couldn't do this anymore.
Did you sue her, or how did that end with him? Do you know?
I think, as far as okay, so here's what happened. I left. I went to Los Angeles. I couldn't take another minute of this because it got to a point of absolute despair.
And we moved to a house in North River.
We had to move. We got evicted from the lake house. We moved to another house. I don't know how she convinced somebody in the same town to do
another giant house that we didn't need across from a river. It was beautiful. I love that house.
She probably got a payment from this guy to get that house. And my father sent me a plane ticket to LA. I hadn't talked to my dad in years. I mean, it's hard. It's easy to forget how hard it was to talk to people, because you had to call long distance. And if you didn't have a house phone, you lived in a rental where you hadn't had a phone put in, you might have to go to a payphone to call my dad. And my dad, you had to remember whether he was at work and what time it was, or whether he was at home at night.
And if
he
wasn't there, right? Like, he's not going to call like a paper.
Right. He couldn't call me back, so I would have to catch him. And then in order to have him send me money for a plane ticket, he'd have to wire me the money, and I'd have to go to a place to get the money, and I'd have to have the ID. But he sent me money for a plane ticket, and I got a plane ticket to LA. I got there. There's a lot more story, but within a day or two of getting there, I happened to be at my dad's house. He was at work, and I picked up the phone, and somebody said, "Is Maureen there?" And I thought that was really weird, because this is my dad's house. They'd been divorced 10 years. I said, "No, but this is her daughter. Can I help you?" And she said, "Oh, this is the only other phone number. I looked up in the phone book. I found his name, and I was looking for Maureen. I'm calling from Sale of the Century." I said, "Okay, that's kind of weird. I mean, yeah, she was there. She was on 4 or 5 years ago, right?" And she said, "Yes, I'm calling because we're doing a tournament of champions, and we're doing a tournament of champions in Australia. And we have our most popular winners, and we want to give Maureen an all expenses paid first class trip for 2 for whoever her companion is, to stay in lovely hotels and come and be on a tournament of champions in Australia. Do you think that she would be interested in this?" And I didn't even know what to think, but I called mom, who was of course super, super excited about the whole thing, and said, "Why don't you come home for Christmas?" And she made all the plans, and this was like October, November. She said, "Why don't you come home for Christmas, and we'll leave in January, and I'll take the 2 first class tickets, and I'll trade them in for all five of us, and we'll all go to Australia together." And I said, "Okay." And that was the only thing that would have gotten me home, was the chance to go somewhere else. That was the only thing that would have gotten me home.
I never knew that.
And, oh, you didn't know that?
I didn't know that.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was the only way she convinced me to leave LA and come home. And so you guys are still living in North Creek, right? But you guys get kicked out, and it's a long story, and there's just...
Well, we're still living in North Creek for the time, and it's like coming up on Christmas. It's like October, November, and mom called us in and said, "I just got the best phone call of my life. We're going to Australia." She said, "I cashed in my 2 tickets for 3 coach tickets, so you and Morgan can go to Australia with me."
No, Katie and I had tickets. We were going.
I didn't.
I got my passport. I spent 2 or 3 weeks in LA setting it up and getting my passport. And it was hard to get my passport. Like all sorts of things that ADHD people can't do. Like I went down to the birth certificate office, and I got my birth certificate. And I went to the passport office. I got my passport. I went and got my picture taken. And Dad had to help me And I spent all my time there, and I got my passport because we were going to Australia.
Wow.
But when I got off the plane back and I flew back to New York, I'd been in LA 6 or 8 weeks, and I'd talked to my dad and had all sorts of stuff going on. And I said I was only going back for this trip, and then I'd figure out my life. This was the first semester I'd ever not been in college, so I was lost. But I got off the plane, and Katie picked me up in Albany, and we drove up back to the Adirondacks, and we got pulled over. And the cop said, "I've been looking for you." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" He said, "You've had bad checks on your account the whole time you've been gone. We've been waiting for you to come back, and you're going to jail." Like, before I'd even gotten
Wow.
home, Mom had written bad checks on my checking account the entire time I was in Los Angeles. And I was in jail. And that's why I didn't go to Australia, because I got out of jail, but I had the trial or the whatever. I couldn't leave because otherwise I'd be arrested again.
Well, I think
And so I had to stay home.
that is a insane way that I didn't know anything about, but I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up this episode. I think we've been
Yeah, it's yeah. So, and the reason, and Katie didn't go because she had her dog and a boyfriend and didn't want to go. And if I wasn't going, she wasn't going. And she was kind of over the whole mom
Wow.
thing too. But so to wrap up, Katie, Mom got us a house with the last $15,000 from this guy. And she wrapped up the whole deal with this businessman. And she gave me and Katie $10,000 or $15,000, got a down payment on another house because we were out of all of this in another town, and said, "You finish up all the business dealings with this guy, take the $15,000 and pay off all the bad checks so nobody else gets arrested. And I'm going to Australia with Meagan and Nora, and I'll be back in," what was it, a month, 6 weeks, 2 weeks? I don't
I
know.
think it
how
was
long
supposed to be
you're
3 weeks.
I think you were supposed to
Yeah.
be gone 3 weeks, and you were
We were
not.
not.
So
And I think that the end of the Adirondacks and the beginning of Australia is for the next episode, because there's a little more in the Adirondacks than
yeah,
this house.
there is. There is. But I mean,
That's crazy.
so I left the Adirondacks, but I wasn't able to really leave. I mean, that was it. Was
I
like,
didn't
it
know
was
that. I had
all,
no idea. I never knew you were supposed to come with us. I went kicking and screaming. I didn't want to go because I loved Indian Lake. I had the best time of my life. There was a boy I had a crush on. I had friends. I was playing soccer. I was playing volleyball. I was playing any sport that would let me not come home. I loved it.
man, I couldn't wait to get
I
out of
loved
there.
it all.
Okay.
All right. Wow. Well,
I think,
it sounds so exciting
yeah,
to me. And it's like so surprising when you say something that I'm like, holy shit, I had no idea that happened. That's great.
that's really funny. I don't know why else would I have been stuck behind in Bolton Landing?
I didn't know. I didn't know why you stayed. I mean, maybe that's why we're doing a podcast for
Yeah,
my own clarity on your life.
yeah, it's really funny.
All
All right.
right. Well,
So after all that, thank you for listening to Forever Wild.
if you are flabbergasted by this episode like I am, or if you've enjoyed this episode, let us know. And I know we went a little long on this, but there's a lot of weird stuff that I didn't know. So I had a lot of questions on this one. But if you've enjoyed it, leave us a review. Find Meagan on Facebook and share it with somebody who loves a good story.
Yeah, my friend Chris the other day said we're saving $150 each every episode by not doing therapy.
Oh, that's so smart. That's actually true.
I know. We would love to hear from you. So send us your questions, thoughts, ideas for what to talk about next, and what you'd like to hear more about.
Until next time, stay wild. Bye.
Bye.